I am here with Andrew. Can you introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Andrew Kruczkiewicz. I am a hydrometeorologist by background based at Columbia University, and I also support various humanitarian organizations such as the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies.
Can you tell me about your experiences working to build community resilience? Yes. Where, when, and how have you done it? And when you accomplish your goals, how do you know?
Yeah. Most of my work is around extreme hydrometeorological events. These are very challenging to predict events.
So is this like a hurricane?
They could be hurricanes, but more of natural hazards driven by intense precipitation and also lack of precipitation. So the example that I would like to share here was actually our work in Mongolia with the Mongolian Red Cross. In Mongolia, they have a unique extreme winter event called a Zud, which is a extreme, dry, cold, windy period of months that happens every few years. And there are ways to predict it.
So it's like a cold drought?
It could be seen as that. I mean, if you talk to the people in Mongolia, they'll say Zud is Zud and nothing else.
Okay, sorry.
But that's also part of the experience of working with the community, understanding this unique type of hazard. But yeah, working as a scientist with the Mongolian Red Cross, along with the universities in Mongolia and the National Meteorological Agency in Mongolia, we were able to integrate remote sensing data with observations from the ground to develop a unique approach to anticipatory action, to take action before the impacts of the Zud were felt.
Wonderful.
And it was one of the early examples of this early warning to early action spectrum that the humanitarian sector has really taken off since then. But yeah, that's one of the best examples, and it was unique for a few reasons. One, we had data. It was not a situation where there was a lack of data. The data was available. It was more about integrating the data. It was more about understanding how to prioritize different data sets, understanding the definition of what this unique extreme event was. What did that mean for the communities? What type of lead time did they need to take certain types of action? And how did that information translate back into our modeling?
Interesting.
So it was a two-way street of translating. It wasn't just we need more communication from the data side so the community members know how to act. It was asking questions such as, how do we take the experience and essentially the data from the community that they're offering us in focus groups and other sorts of meetings? How do we bring that up and say, hey, we would have modeled this phenomena in this way. However, now that we've spent time and learned more about it, we're actually going to tweak it to be more appropriate to allow for more effective anticipatory action.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Can you share some of the challenges or the main challenges you've been facing over the course of the work? And to the degree that you have overcome them, how have you done it?
So here at Climate Week, a narrative that's arising for many of these events is we need more data. We need more data. Data needs to be more available, more accessible. And to some extent, I agree. But we're also moving into an era where we have many types of data at our fingertips. We have new approaches to AI and machine learning, making data more available than ever. And from my experience working in some of the most, let's say, most complex humanitarian contexts, many times it's not necessarily about more data. And actually, too much data could lead to challenges of how do we make decisions? How do we prioritize different data sets? And this all takes time.
So it's like people being paralyzed by information.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
Okay.
So this is emerging as one of my primary roles in integrating data into decision making, is thinking more about the appropriate and effective ways to translate different data sets. It's not about saying, we would have taken action if we had more data, but if we have 5 flood forecasts, how do we merge them? How do you weight them? How do you say this flood forecast is actually less appropriate for flash floods because it's more tailored to a different type of flood, for example? So this is an emerging career path in itself, to have translators of the science at the intersection of science, policy, and practice. And this is something that I would like to highlight here at Climate Week, because I feel like people are mentioning the need for this, but we need to call that out. It's not just about communication either. It's about understanding the ethical implications of that translator role. Yeah.
And I guess being sensitive to the cultures that you're dealing with, right? While you do that.
Totally. Yes. And that's one of the most important factors for sure. And it takes time to understand a community, and to some extent here in New York City, in my neighborhood, I live in a flood zone, and block by block, the risk looks different. Block by block, there is a different socioeconomic setup. And what works for one neighborhood in terms of building resilience to floods will not work in another neighborhood and potentially can actually lead to unforeseen consequences. Yeah.
Oh, for sure, which can be very deadly.
Totally,
right?
yes.
So before I ask you the last question, I want to ask a follow-up because you talked a lot about an example in Mongolia and kind of thinking through here at Climate Week. Are you starting to focus and use the method that you described here in the United States to help us here?
Professionally, my work is almost exclusively, or has been for the last 15 years, exclusively international. However, it is my goal on a personal level to think more about how to draw lessons from the international context to build resilience, to develop anticipatory action strategies, to make sure that the most underserved communities here in the US, are able to not only access data, but also take action. These are very different things. And we have many examples from around the world where this has happened, but certainly it's still a challenge in many parts of the US and here in New York City as well.
This is so fascinating. Thank you so much. So the last question I have for you, as we look forward at the likelihood of extreme events coming in our warming world, what's your advice about how to be more effective in building community resilience given the current political environment, based on your expertise and experience?
I mean, extreme events are going to continue to happen, and they're going to continue to be more complex, more interconnected. We're going to see more types of compound events, and we're also—
Can you tell us what a compound event
Sure.
is?
So a compound event is essentially when we have different types of hazards interacting with each other. That's one example of a compound event. Also, a compound event can be described as when we have a climate and meteorological extreme align with a socioeconomic or health, let's say, crisis, such as COVID, for example. So there's different types of compound events. However, if we just focus on like the climate and meteorological compound event, we're starting to see heat waves happen at the same time as flash floods, for example, whereby the warning system and the actions, the standard operating procedures that we may have in place for flash floods may be less effective if it comes at a tail end of a 2-month heat wave, let's say.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Or in terms of recovery, what happens if we have a flash flood or a storm surge event followed by 2 to 3 weeks of severe heat? The recovery and resilience buildings—
thinking about electricity and thinking about air conditioning and all of the things that people need during a heat wave, right?
Well, especially, and you need people outside, like saving lives and rebuilding. I mean, this
Walking and gutting, for sure.
That's right. It's hard to shield yourself from the heat when you have to be on the ground, helping. So, this is starting to be— there is a group of researchers that are starting to think more about these things, but unfortunately, this is part of our present, and it will increasingly be part of our consideration of understanding risk, building resilience in the future. But
Thank you so much for coming out to talk to me. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Andrew.